this is the concept of allopatric speciation. And you don't need to know any of the other types of speciation. So the dot point here just says that you need to know the processes of evolution and the action of different mutations and selection pressures, which we've talked about, and how they contribute to this thing called allopatric speciation. So this is creating new species. So all of the stuff that we've been doing so far are some of the processes that can help create a new species. Now we're going to go through what does it mean and what do you need to be able to create a new species. Often you can get confused in questions, and I will make sure that we practice plenty of them between questions that are asking you about allopatric speciation and natural selection. So we'll just go through the definition of allopatric speciation and its process, and then compare it and contrast it in class between what that means for allopatric speciation and natural selection. So allopatric speciation means separated by a geographical barrier. So it means that there has to be, hang on, let me just see, geographical barrier could be a mountain coming between two populations. It could be a river, yeah, it could be a glacier, it could be an ocean or a sea, yeah. So they are some kind of geographical separation between two groups of the same species. So they must be separated physically, because this means that they are then reproductively isolated. So we talked about all the other ways that things can be reproductively isolated, but with allopatric speciation, it's all got to do with geography. And this is the way that most new species have developed over time. You must have restricted gene flow. There can't be any immigration, there can't be any emigration, because if that happens, then you're going to maintain that kind of connection with each other. So they need to be completely separated. So allopatric speciation usually occurs when that geographical barrier, and you can see that geographical barrier in the middle here, that geographical barrier, geographical, if I can spell, geographical barrier physically isolates two populations of some kind of ancestral. When I say ancestral, I just mean an old species, yeah? So some species get separated by a barrier. Now, on each side of that barrier, yeah, you can have a couple of things happen. You could have genetic drift happen on one side. You could have, on the other side, natural selection act against that population. So natural selection, can you see how it is part of allopatric speciation? It is not exclusive to it. It is actually embroiled in it. So natural selection can occur on both sides. Genetic drift can occur on both sides, but essentially something is going to happen to change the frequency of alleles. Now, what would happen is when you bring them back together again, they can no longer interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So if they can't do this, then it means that speciation has occurred. So if you were ever asked in an exam question, how do I know if speciation has occurred? It'd be, you try and breed the two together, and if they can produce fertile or can't produce fertile offspring, then therefore they are two different species. Let's go through an example. These are two different types of squirrels in the Grand Canyon. So when I visited the Grand Canyon, I went to the North Rim, which is only about 10% of people in the population end up going to the North Rim. And then most people go to the South Rim, which is the side that you get to from, where am I thinking? Vegas. So the South Rim squirrels, have a look at them. Can you see how they are a bit lighter in color? They definitely don't have this, they have this white bit in the middle here. They have less furry ears. You can say the same thing over here. These guys, both these, so we've got a chipmunk and a squirrel, and they're both different. They're definitely much furrier. Now, I know it doesn't look like it, but actually one side of the Grand Canyon is a lot higher than the other side. And so if you're a lot higher, what do you think about a mountain and what's going to happen to the climate on the different types of a mountain? So the higher the mountain, the higher you go up a mountain, the colder it gets. You can see that in these furry animals that live on the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. So that's a definite physical barrier, and I can see these different species that exist there. So how did it happen? They look very similar, but they are definitely different species. We've tried to interbreed them, no successful mating, or no fertile offspring. So how did it happen? How did this population of squirrels and this population of chipmunks evolve into two different species? Essentially, you had a population of some kind of ancestral chipmunk and some kind of ancestral squirrel, and they lived on both sides or lived in that whole area. And what happened was the river, the Colorado River, started to cut a hole down the middle, and they became geographically isolated. So there was one population on one side, one population on the other. So as they become geographically isolated over time, the gene flow between the two groups has stopped. So this group over here is existing, this group over here is existing. Now there are different, 100%, this is the most important thing, there are different selection pressures on one side. So one side is colder than the other side, yes? And as a result, the phenotypes that were advantageous on one side are going to be different to the phenotypes that are advantageous on the other side. And as a result, they're going to undergo natural selection, both groups, and become gradually more and more different from each other. Now, when you get one of the squirrels from one side and take it to the squirrel on the other side, and you try and interbreed them after a certain number of generations, it doesn't work. And that is what we call reproductive isolation. That's when we finish off this whole process and we say that they are now reproductively isolated. We're going to work through some more examples of that and go through some exam questions that will outline that for you too.